Places like this aren't meant for people like you, Laura sneered, her eyes rolling as if Brandon's very presence was a mistake. He was just a friendly, hopeful young man trying to fit in, but her words hit him like a slap, freezing him in place. Around them, laughter bubbled, marking, sharp, merciless, and for the first time, Brandon felt the weight of exclusion like a physical force pressing down on him. It wasn't just rejection, it was a reminder that in a world like this, people like him were meant to be invisible. But that moment wasn't the end, it was the spark. Behind that cruel glance, a story was about to unfold. One that would turn humiliation into strength, judgment into change, and fear into power. What would Brandon do when faced with such cold rejection? How could one person rewrite the rules of an entire campus? The answers are shocking, stirring, and nothing like anyone could imagine. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Now let's see how this story really began. Brandon Hayes stepped onto the campus of Hayes University with the quietness of someone returning to a place that was both familiar and foreign. The morning air was sharp, the kind that made every sound, footsteps, distant laughter, rolling suitcase wheels, feel louder than it should. At 27, he walked like someone older, someone who had carried too much too young, but he masked it beneath an easy, steady gait that revealed nothing. He had not set foot on the grounds in years, not since his father told him, half proud and half afraid, "One day, this will be yours to fix." Most heirs received empires or expectations. Brandon had inherited a broken institution pretending to be perfect. And now, under the polished title Chief Transformation Officer, he was back not to be welcomed, not to be celebrated, but to quietly undo decades of rot. No one knew his face. That was intentional. The board approved his arrival through a flurry of signatures and obligatory applause, yet not a single faculty member could have picked him out of a lineup. He could walk among them unseen, which was exactly what he planned to do. 3 weeks undercover. 3 weeks not as Brandon Hayes, the founder's son, the new administrator, the man everyone would eventually fear or revere, but is just another transfer student trying to find a place in a campus carved up by invisible social borders. So he swapped the tailored suit for jeans, a faded hoodie, and a backpack he purposely scuffed on the pavement before stepping inside. His reflection in a glass door barely looked like the executive who had briefed national committees. And that was good. He didn't want admiration, he wanted truth. Freshman orientation buzzed with too much energy, music, chatter, the flutter of pamphlets. He slipped quietly into a back row of folding chairs, doing what he always did best, observing. People revealed themselves most honestly when they believed no one important was watching. That was when she sat next to him. Laura Chun. Blonde hair falling effortlessly over her shoulders, posture perfect, presence impossible to ignore. She didn't walk through the world so much as glide, expecting it to widen for her. Sorority royalty, campus darling, the girl whose shadow alone dictated who mattered and who didn't. She glanced sideways at Brandon. Her expression shifted almost instantly curiosity, then dismissal, then something sharper. She wrinkled her nose, leaning back as if his very proximity offended her. And then she said it, loudly, clearly, purposefully. Places like this really aren't meant for people like you. A few nearby students turned, some smirked, some looked away, 1 or 2 waited to see if there would be a reaction. There wasn't. Brandon didn't flinch, didn't meet her eyes, didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing whether she had pierced anything deeper. He simply opened a plain notebook cream paper, no lines, and began writing. Not about her, not about the insult, about the system that made her believe she had the authority to say it. But her words stayed with him longer than he expected. Not because they hurt. He had hurt far worse growing up, but because they were so familiar. He had been told versions of that sentence in boardrooms, classrooms, restaurants, airports, sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted, Always the same message: you don't belong here. Over the next 3 weeks, he moved through the campus like a shadow stitched into its fabric. Nobody noticed the same quiet guy showing up everywhere, first in chemistry lectures, then in dining halls, in libraries, in crowded parties where music shook the floorboards. He watched, he listened, he learned. He saw who got second chances and who never got first ones. He saw whose names opened doors and whose accents closed them. He saw Laura and her circle-polished, confident, untouchable steering conversations, excluding people with laughter disguised as harmless fun, sometimes subtle, sometimes brutal. And every night he returned to a tiny rented room off campus and wrote pages of observations, patterns of cruelty disguised as culture, smiles masking entitlement, rules bent for some and weaponized against others. Laura stood at the center of it all without ever realizing she was being studied by the man who would soon hold the fate of her academic life in his hands. On his final night undercover, walking past the marble steps of the library, he heard her voice again. She stood with 2 friends, champagne bright, confidence dripping from every syllable. "My family has an entire library wing named after us," she bragged. "I'm basically untouchable here." Brandon paused where the shadows swallowed him. For a moment, he simply watched her, this girl who had no idea how close she was to losing everything she relied on. The entitlement in her voice wasn't unique. It was inherited, cultivated, reinforced by a system that rewarded the loudest egos and stepped over the quietest needs. He let out the faintest laugh, not cruel, not triumphant, just a quiet acknowledgement of irony. Then he walked away. Tomorrow the mask would come off. Tomorrow the campus would see who he really was. And tomorrow Laura Chun would learn that some people belonged more deeply than she ever realized. The welcome gala shimmered like a world made of glass and gold. Chandeliers dripped light across the grand ballroom, each crystal catching reflections of gowns, tuxedos, polished shoes, and the restless anticipation of a new academic year. The air smelled of champagne and ambition, a mixture that lingered just long enough to make everyone feel slightly brighter than they were in daylight. Laura Chun entered as though the entire room had been choreographed for her arrival. The $15,000 dress she wore hugged her perfectly, a soft silver fabric that shimmered like moonlit water. She carried a flute of champagne in one hand and confidence in the other. Heads turned, not because she demanded attention, but because attention seemed drawn to her like iron filings to a magnet. Her heels clicked across the polished floor, each step declaring she owned every inch of the place. She smiled at familiar donors, exchanged air kisses with professors who favored her family, and laughed too loudly at jokes that didn't matter. She was radiant, composed, entirely in control, at least on the surface. Underneath, a low hum of anxiety lived in her chest, not fear exactly, but the fragile awareness that control, no matter how tight her grip, could always slip. She pushed the feeling down and let her practiced charm take over. The president of the university stepped onto the stage, tapping the microphone with the caution of someone who knew the room carried its own electricity. Conversations softened but didn't die entirely. People were still riding the high of the evening. "Good evening," he began, smiling warmly. "Tonight is a special night for Hayes University, a night of new beginnings. And it is my pleasure to introduce the youngest senior administrator in our institution's history." The room quieted. Laura didn't think much of it. Universities loved ceremonial announcements. They loved titles even more. The president continued, voice lifting with pride. "Please welcome our new Chief Transformation Officer, Mr. Brandon Hayes, Harvard-trained MBA, holder of an accelerated doctorate in organizational leadership, and former consultant on multiple national education reform projects." The murmurs were instant. Harvard? So young. A doctorate already? Transformation officer? What does that even mean? Laura blinked. The name meant nothing to her. She took a slow sip of champagne, expecting to see some older, polished man walk out. Someone with gray at his temples, perhaps a stiff posture, the kind who'd spent decades climbing through academic bureaucracy. But then, Brandon stepped into the light. A perfect black tux, tailored to fit his frame with absolute precision. Shoulders relaxed, expression calm, movements unhurried. He didn't stride out. He simply appeared, as though the room shifted to accommodate him. The whispers stopped. Someone gasped. Someone else dropped a napkin. A donor nudged another, whispering, "He looks like he walked out of a magazine." Laura's glass trembled. For a heartbeat, it nearly slipped from her fingers. It couldn't be him. It couldn't be the same quiet guy from orientation. The one she had brushed off, dismissed, pushed aside without a second thought. But his eyes lifted, scanning the crowd, and when they found hers, the world seemed to shrink into a single, unbearably silent moment. He didn't glare. He didn't smirk. He didn't expose her with a single look. He just saw her, calm, unreadable, detached in a way that made her stomach tighten. The president stepped aside, offering Brandon the microphone. Brandon held it lightly, as though it weighed nothing. Yet when he spoke, the room felt held in his hands. "I am honored to serve this institution," he said, voice low, steady. "But before I speak about plans or policies, I want to speak about something more important." His pause felt intentional, an invitation for the entire ballroom to breathe with him. "Dignity," he continued. "Belonging. The simple truth that every person here deserves to feel seen, respected, and valued. No matter where they come from, how they look, or what assumptions others make about them." Someone near Laura exhaled softly, maybe even with guilt. Brandon's gaze swept the room, but Laura felt as though he was still looking directly at her, as though he was speaking to the version of her from that very first day, the one who had carelessly said, "People like you don't belong here." He never mentioned her, never mentioned the moment. He didn't need to. He was above it. His voice softened. A university should be a place where no one ever feels small, where no one is dismissed, where no one walks away believing they don't deserve to be here. The quiet inside the ballroom thickened into something heavy, something honest. Laura felt heat rise to her cheeks, not anger, not embarrassment, something more fragile, something sinking inside her ribs. After the speech, applause erupted with a force that startled even the older donors. Lines formed immediately, students Brandon had met undercover stepping forward, shaking his hand, thanking him, sharing small pieces of themselves with a man they thought was one of them. He listened to all of them with that same calm light in his eyes. Laura wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor, to be anywhere but here. She turned toward the exit, hoping to slip away unnoticed. But a hand grabbed her arm. Her sorority president, always poised, always calculating. "Laura," she hissed, "that's Brandon Hayes. Fix this." The words weren't a request. They were an order. Laura didn't answer. She couldn't. Not with her heartbeat pounding in her ears and the weight of what she had done tightening around her throat like a scarf pulled too tight. She left the ballroom as quietly as she could, the echoes of applause trailing behind her like a reminder. The next morning, sunlight broke across her dorm room in thin, unforgiving lines. Her phone buzzed with a new email notification. She reached for it lazily until she saw the sender, Office of Student Affairs. Her breath caught. The message was short, clinical, sharp enough to feel like a cut. "Please report to the Office of Student Affairs, Monday, 9 a.m. Subject: Review of your merit scholarship renewal. B. Hayes." Her fingers went cold. Nothing in her $15,000 dress, nothing in her perfect smile, nothing in her carefully curated reputation could protect her now. She stared at the screen, heart trembling. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't routine. This was the beginning of consequences. Laura arrived 10 minutes early, though her body felt late, late to courage, late to honesty, late to the version of herself she wished she could perform on command. The hallway outside the Office of Student Affairs was too quiet, too polished, every footstep echoing like judgment. She clutched her binder even though there was nothing inside except blank paper meant to make her feel organized. Her hands trembled so badly that the pages fluttered like small trapped wings. She kept rehearsing the words in her head. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. It was a misunderstanding. I wasn't myself that day. It won't happen again." Each version felt thinner than the last, collapsing under its own weakness. She didn't know how to apologize to someone who had every right to hate her, someone she had dismissed, belittled, looked straight in the eyes and treated like nothing. Her throat tightened. She whispered to herself, "Just breathe." But breathing didn't make the fear smaller. The door opened quietly and a student assistant nodded. "Mr. Hayes will see you now." Her stomach twisted. She stepped inside. Brandon's office was nothing like she expected. No heavy mahogany desk, no walls suffocating under framed diplomas. There were certificates, yes, and bookshelves stacked with leadership texts and education reports. But the space felt open, warm, almost disarmingly simple. A single plant sat near the window, bending toward the light. Brandon stood by the desk, adjusting a stack of folders. He looked composed, not cold, calm in a way that made Laura's panic feel even more exposed. He gestured to the chair. "You can sit." She sat too quickly, almost stumbling into the seat, and her binder slid from her hands onto the floor. When she reached to grab it, he gently shook his head. "It's okay," he said quietly. His voice wasn't angry. That somehow made everything worse. Laura tried to start. "Mr. Hayes, I wanted to say I'm not here to punish you," he interrupted softly, taking his own seat. "Let's start there." She blinked, startled. Punishment was exactly what she expected. Maybe even deserved. He folded his hands in front of him, expression steady. "I'm here because I want to understand why you felt the need to say what you said." Her breath caught. Not the what? Not the insult. Not the mess she made. The why. No one had ever asked her that. Life with her mother, her father, her sorority, her friends. Everything was about appearances, actions, outcomes. Never reasons. Reasons were dangerous. Reasons revealed too much. Reasons cracked the mask. She looked at Brandon, feeling as though he had gently pulled a rug out from beneath her defenses. She swallowed hard. "I don't know." He didn't respond, just watched her with patient stillness, the silence wide enough for truth to breathe. Her voice wavered. I felt pressured. Everyone expects me to be this perfect version of myself all the time, to fit this image. She pressed her fingers together until her knuckles whitened. "If I don't, everything falls apart." Brandon nodded, not encouraging or judging, just listening, really listening. "I'm scared of losing status," she admitted, her face flushing, "of being nobody, being ordinary." Her voice cracked at the last word. It was the most honest thing she had said in months, maybe years. Her eyes stung. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall. She didn't cry in front of people. Crying meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant weakness. For a long moment, Brandon said nothing. Then he leaned back slightly, his expression softening in a way she didn't expect. "I know what it feels like," he said quietly. "To walk into rooms where people look at you and decide you don't belong before you say a word." Laura's breath hitched. "I grew up hearing those messages," he continued. "From teachers, neighbors, sometimes even people who didn't mean harm. Not your place. Not your world. People like you don't make it here." The words echoed painfully because they were the same words she had thrown at him. "I learned early that the fight isn't just about proving others wrong," he said. "It's about not allowing their voices to become your own." Something inside Laura shifted, small but real, a piece of her armor loosening. Brandon exhaled slowly. I don't want to drag you through disciplinary action if there's a path that actually helps you grow and helps others too. She looked up, wary but curious. You have a choice, he said. You can co-lead the new Campus Belonging Initiative this semester. It's real work, real responsibility. You'll help design programs, listen to students, understand experiences beyond your own. Her heart pounded. She had expected community service, fines, maybe a formal warning. Not this. Or, he added gently, we proceed with a formal conduct review. The words landed with heavy clarity. A review could jeopardize her scholarship, her resume, her family's expectations. It wasn't a real choice, not to someone like her. I'll do the initiative, she said quickly, almost too quickly. He didn't look surprised. If anything, a faint, unreadable smile touched his mouth, not condescending, but knowing. As if he had predicted her decision long before she stepped into the room. Good, he said softly. We'll start next week. She stood to leave, wanting desperately to escape, to breathe air that wasn't laced with her own shame. She reached the door before he spoke again. Laura? She froze. His voice was low. Not threatening, not harsh, but carrying a weight that curled down her spine. I already know about your family's financial situation, he said. I've known since day one. Her blood ran cold. She turned slowly, eyes widening, panic flooding her veins. You what? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He simply looked at her with a calmness that felt like a mirror held to her deepest fear. I know the pressure you're under, he said. I know what happens if you lose that scholarship. I know why you cling to the image you've built. Her breath shook so hard she almost dropped the door handle. This isn't about trapping you, he added gently, but it is about accountability and choice. She stepped back into the hallway, heart racing, guilt twisting into anxiety. Anxiety twisting into something she didn't have a name for yet. Because in one sentence, Brandon Hayes had shown her something she had never experienced before. This wasn't mercy. This wasn't vengeance. This was leverage. And it terrified her. The first weeks of the initiative feel like standing barefoot on glass. Every meeting cuts her open a little more. Brandon doesn't go easy on her, not even for a moment. His voice stays calm, his posture composed, his eyes unreadable. But the structure of the initiative is unmistakably intentional, accountability by immersion. And the first blow hits fast. He pairs her with Marcus, the work-study student she used to mock without ever learning his last name. The memory of that old smirk she once threw his way haunts her as they sit down with their shared workload. Marcus doesn't comment on it. He doesn't bring up the past, doesn't ask for an apology, doesn't look at her with resentment or triumph. He simply hands her the packet of surveys they need to review and says, "We can start with these." Calm, neutral, professional. The exact opposite of what she deserves. Week after week. Brandon has her absorbing stories she had spent years pretending weren't real. Students sleeping in their cars between classes. First-generation kids terrified of being exposed as outsiders. International students grappling with homesickness alone. And scholarship holders carrying shame like an extra backpack wherever they go. At first, she sits rigidly, arms crossed, body angled away, as if putting space between herself and the discomfort pressing into her chest could ease it. But as the weeks go on, something begins to change. Not quickly, not beautifully, just enough for a sliver of light to creep in. She watches Marcus speak with calm assurance as he guides the discussions. She notices how other students look at him with genuine warmth, not because of his status or family background, but because he's earned it through kindness. She sees how people relax around him, how even the most guarded voices open under his patient attention. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, she begins to glimpse the outlines of a world she never bothered to see. One afternoon, after a long meeting, she lingers behind. brushing her fingers against the corner of a poster board covered with anonymous stories submitted by students. Some are scribbled in shaky handwriting, some neatly typed, but all convey the same yearning. I just want to matter here. She stares at the words until they blur. The next day in the cafeteria, she carries a tray, trying to remain unnoticed, when a familiar voice cuts sharply beside her. Laura, her former best friend, hisses, stepping close. "You're embarrassing yourself hanging out with them." The disdain drips like acid, trying to eat through her resolve. It's the very tone Laura once imitated perfectly, the tone she used to think made her powerful. But this time, something inside her doesn't flinch. Something holds steady. She turns, tray trembling faintly in her hands, but her voice comes out stronger than she feels. "No," she says quietly, breath hitching once. "I was embarrassing myself before." The cafeteria falls silent. Conversations freeze mid-sentence. Forks hover over plates. Dozens of eyes turn toward her, stunned. Her old self cracks, clean, sharp, irreversibly. She stands exposed in the echo of her own words, but for the first time, she isn't ashamed of the truth leaving her mouth. Her former friend stares at her, expression crumpling into something ugly, but Laura doesn't look away. She walks past her, heart racing. Tray clattering softly as she sets it down at a table far removed from the people she once shaped herself around. That night, the price of truth arrives. Her father calls, voice strained, breath clipped, tone trembling in a way she hasn't heard since she was 10. The family business is collapsing. Their reserves are gone. The debts are suffocating. They're months, maybe weeks from bankruptcy. She slides down the side of a bookshelf in the library stacks. Phone still in her hand, chest collapsing under the weight of everything she has spent years hiding behind. Her perfect image, her polished confidence, her carefully curated life, all of it is peeling away faster than she can hold it together. The tears come hard, violent, the kind she can't control, the kind she can't swallow back. She covers her mouth with both hands because the sound of her own sobbing scares her. She thinks she's alone. But then she hears footsteps, slow and hesitant, and Marcus steps into view. He doesn't speak at first. He doesn't ask what's wrong. He doesn't offer empty comfort or prying questions. He simply crouches down beside her, close enough for her to feel his presence, but far enough to give her space. After a long moment, he says softly, "Do you want to talk?" Not what happened. Not, "Are you okay?" Just the offer. Quiet, steady, safe. And somehow, that makes her cry harder. She tells him everything in broken pieces. The falling business, the debts, the fear she has carried for years behind her practiced smile. She expects judgment, maybe even satisfaction. But Marcus just listens. His face stays gentle, his eyes soft, his voice steady when he murmurs, "I'm sorry you're going through this." She wants to apologize to him for everything she ever said, everything she ever was, but the words choke in her throat. An apology feels too small, too fragile to hold the weight between them. As she wipes her eyes with the back of her sleeve, she becomes aware of another presence, a faint shift in the air, soft footsteps stopping just out of the light. Brandon. He's watching from between the shelves, hands folded behind his back, expression unreadable in the dim glow of the library lamps. He doesn't interrupt, he doesn't approach, he simply stands there, silent, observing the moment with an intensity she can feel in her bones. For the first time since this all began, she realizes he isn't just testing her. He's waiting to see who she will decide to become. The storm breaks on a Thursday morning, sharp and cold, long before the sky decides to brighten. Brandon arrives at the administrative building before sunrise, carrying a folder so thin it looks harmless. But everyone who sees his face as he walks the hallway understands something heavy is coming. Something old. Something that has been rotting beneath the floorboards for decades. By 9 a.m., the emergency donor board meeting is called to order. The room hums with well-filled portraits, oak paneling, the faint scent of expensive perfume and tailored suits. Legacy families sit around the table like they're presiding over a monarchy rather than a university. They talk in low murmurs until Richard Sterling enters. Richard Sterling moves like someone who has never once been told the word no. He is the oldest and most influential board member, his presence carrying the force of generations of inherited power. His silver hair is immaculate, his cufflinks gleaming, his smile practiced into a slow, cutting curve. When he takes his seat, the room settles into a heavy silence. Brandon remains standing, the folder tucked under his arm. He's young, too young for this room, too young for these men who have spent their lives believing institutions exist to serve them. Yet, he carries himself with a steadiness that unsettles them. He does not shrink. He does not defer. He simply waits. Sterling clears his throat. "We understand you've requested this emergency session," he says. "Proceed." Brandon opens the folder. The sound is soft, but it slices through the room. "I have gathered evidence," he begins, voice calm, almost gentle, "of systematic fraud conducted by several legacy families' grade tampering. Manipulated admissions rankings, falsified athletic profiles, and direct payments to faculty and administrative staff." A ripple moves through the table. Not outrage, fear disguised as indignation. Brandon begins placing documents in the center of the table, one by one. Each page is a crack in the facade the board has built over half a century. Email chains, payment records, anonymous testimonies, timeline charts, digital forensics. Enough evidence to scorch the entire system. He does not raise his voice. He does not dramatize. He simply presents the truth. Sterling lets him finish, watching with an unreadable expression. When Brandon finally stops speaking, the older man leans back slowly, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate precision. "You're 27, Sterling says softly, the words carrying more condescension than volume. "You don't understand how things really work." Brandon's jaw tightens, not out of anger, out of recognition. He's heard variations of that sentence his entire life. "I understand enough," he replies. Sterling smiles, a small, cold stretch of lips that never reaches his eyes. "Son, you're standing in a room full of people who built this place stone by stone, check by check. We don't bend because a child with an MBA and an accelerated doctorate thinks he found a monster under the bed." The insult hangs in the air like smoke. Brandon doesn't move. Sterling taps the stack of evidence with a manicured finger. "Pull the trigger on this," he says softly, "and we pull every dollar. All of it. Your father may own the school, but we," he gestures around the table, "own the money." The threat is not veiled. It is sharp and absolute. A blade placed carefully at the throat of the university. The room waits for Brandon to break, to flinch, to soften, to negotiate. Instead, he exhales slowly like someone making peace with a difficult but necessary truth. "Then we'll find new money," he says. A few board members shift in their seats. Others look down. Sterling's smile fades. Brandon gathers his documents, closes the folder, and nods once informal dismissal. The meeting dissolves into murmurs and stiff goodbyes, but a current runs beneath the politeness fear that the world they built is finally cracking. When he leaves the room, he feels the weight of eyes on his back, but he does not turn around. The real ambush waits outside. In the hallway, near the staircase where soft light spills through tall windows, Laura stands alone. She expected to be invisible, just another student walking through the wrong corridor at the wrong time. She doesn't expect Richard Sterling to single her out. He steps in front of her, his polished shoes halting inches from hers. "Laura," he says with a voice dipped in false warmth. A word. Her stomach tightens. She glances instinctively toward the boardroom doors, but there's no rescue coming. Brandon is already gone, And Richard Sterling is a man who senses weakness the way wolves smell blood. She nods stiffly. He steps closer, just enough that she can feel the imbalance of power pressing into the air. "I assume you know what's happening," he says. The boy is trying to burn down an institution he doesn't understand. She doesn't respond. Sterling watches her carefully. "Your parents tried to buy your way in 2 years ago." The words hit like a slap. Her breath catches in her throat. Her hands tremble at her sides. She feels exposed, gutted, humiliated in a way she has never felt before, not even during her worst moments with Brandon. Sterling leans in, lowering his voice. "There's a file. Detailed. Damning. If it surfaces, you'll lose everything, your reputation, your program, your future. But," he lets the words stretch, almost kindly, "help me stop him, and I'll make sure that file disappears forever." Her mouth goes dry. The offer is a lifeline wrapped in barbed wire. A chance at safety paired with a lifetime of being owned by the wrong people. She wants to run. She wants to disappear. She wants to scream. But instead she stands frozen, staring at the man who represents everything she once believed in: wealth, prestige, unshakable power, and realizes she no longer knows if those things are worth saving. Her father is drowning. Her family is collapsing. Brandon already knows her secrets, and now Richard Sterling is dangling one more: save herself, or do what's right. The choice settles over her like a weight she can't breathe under. She feels the walls closing in, the echoes of her old life pulling her one way, and something quieter, something painful but honest, pulling her the other. She swallows hard, heart pounding, knowing that whichever path she chooses will transform her forever, and there is no going back. The campus sleeps under a heavy blanket of fog. Lamps cast small gold circles across the empty pathways, and the wind moves softly through the trees like it's whispering secrets it doesn't want anyone to hear. Laura walks alone, arms wrapped around herself, each step unsteady. Her phone still holds Sterling's words like poison. Her heart still beats too fast, and her choice, her terrible, impossible choice, still presses against her ribs. Brandon's email had arrived shortly after sunset. "If you need to talk, come by. Midnight." No explanation, no pressure. Just a line written with the calm certainty he always carries. She knows he must already suspect something is wrong. Something big. Something dangerous. By the time she reaches the administration building, her palms are damp with nervous sweat. The corridors feel darker than usual, the silence sharper. She climbs the staircase slowly, her breath catching at each step. When she reaches his office, she hesitates before knocking. The door is half open. A soft light spills out. "Laura," Brandon says without turning, as if he sensed her the moment she arrived. "Come in." She steps inside. His office is neat, minimally decorated, the kind of place where nothing distracts from the work, papers stacked perfectly, a single plant near the window, the faint scent of coffee. Brandon sits behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, posture relaxed yet alert. He gestures to the chair across from him. "Sit." She does, but her legs tremble as she lowers herself. For a moment he just looks at her, not with judgment, not with disappointment, but with a kind of quiet patience that unnerves her more than anger ever could. "What happened?" he asks softly. Laura's throat tightens. She opens her mouth, but no sound comes out. She tries again, voice barely above a whisper. "Sterling cornered me after the meeting." Brandon's expression doesn't change, but something hardens in his eyes. She breathes in shakily. He told me my parents tried to buy my admission 2 years ago. He said he has the proof, the file, and if I help him stop you, he'll make sure it disappears forever." Silence fills the room, heavy and pulsing. When Brandon speaks, his voice is low, steady. "And you're telling me this why?" The question is simple, but it breaks something inside her. "Because I don't want to be that person anymore," she says. words tumbling out, fragile and trembling. Because I'm scared. Because I don't know what to do. Her voice cracks. Because I don't want to save myself at the cost of hurting someone who's actually trying to do something good. She wipes at her eyes, but the tears fall anyway. Brandon watches her quietly, then reaches for a folder on the corner of his desk. He slides it across the polished surface toward her. Open it. Her hands shake as she lifts the cover. Inside are documents she recognizes immediately. Emails, financial statements, names, her parents' names, attached to an attempted bribe. Her stomach flips. I've known about the attempted bribe since before I arrived, Brandon says gently. Your parents acted without your knowledge. You were 18. And 6 weeks later, you reported it to admissions yourself. Her eyes snap up in confusion. What? No, I only sent them an email asking if something like that had happened without my consent. I didn't know that was the report, Brandon says. It was enough for them to open a file and conduct an internal review. You came forward. Even if you didn't realize how brave that was. She presses her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. That, Brandon continues, leaning back slightly, is why I gave you a chance. Her breath stutters. The room tilts slightly. So this whole thing, she whispers, voice breaking, was a test? Brandon shakes his head. No, it was an opportunity. She blinks at him, tears clinging stubbornly to her lashes. The test, he says softly, is what you do now. The words land with a weight that hurts, but not in the way she expected. Not as punishment, as responsibility. As possibility. Brandon reaches for another folder, this one thicker, heavier. He lays it in front of him but doesn't open it. I'm taking this to the state attorney general, he says. Tonight. Sterling's network extends deep, but not deep enough to bury this outside university walls. Laura swallows hard and... Me? He studies her for a long moment. You're going to get Sterling to put his threats in writing, Brandon says. Text messages, emails, anything where he implicates himself. You're the only one he trusts enough to be careless around right now. Her breath hitches. That could ruin me. That could save everyone else, Brandon replies quietly. Students who are denied fair admission, faculty forced to change grades, families who never had a chance. You could help end decades of corruption. She looks down, fingers twisting in her lap. Fear wraps around her chest, squeezing tight. But beneath the fear, something else flickers, an ember she doesn't recognize. Why? She whispers, voice trembling. Why trust me with this? Brandon stands, moving around the desk. He doesn't sit. He kneels slightly so he's at eye level with her. The gesture is so unexpected. Her breath catches. Because, he says, his voice soft but firm, real justice isn't about destroying people. His eyes hold hers, steady, unflinching. It's about giving them the chance to choose who they're going to be. Her tears spill again, but this time they fall quietly, slowly, like something inside her is unraveling in a way that finally makes room for truth. He offers her a tissue. She takes it with shaking fingers. What if I fail? She asks. You won't, Brandon says. But even if you stumble, you won't be alone. Something deep inside her loosens, aching and tender. The clock on the wall ticks softly, the sound steady and grounding. Laura inhales slowly, then nods, just once. But with intention. I'll do it, she says. Brandon rises, his expression unreadable but gentler than she's ever seen it. Then the real work starts now. And for the first time in her life, Laura leaves someone's office not feeling smaller, but bigger. Not with shame, but with purpose. Outside, the fog is beginning to lift. The weeks that follow feel nothing like the world Laura once knew. They stretch long and tense, filled with a quiet dread that sits at the base of her spine. Every morning she wakes with the same dull ache in her chest. Every night she falls asleep wondering whether the next day will be the one where everything collapses for good. Yet she keeps going. Because she chose this. Because she said yes. Because for the first time in her life, she wants to stand for something instead of merely protecting herself. She begins collecting everything Sterling sends her. At first, she thinks it will take weeks to get anything usable. But corruption has its own arrogance. Sterling slips quickly. Messages arrive on her phone, crisp and threatening. Emails land in her inbox, dripping with entitlement, pressure, promises, veiled threats. Sometimes he pretends to be offering her guidance. Sometimes he tries fear. Sometimes guilt. He is a man used to control, and he cannot fathom that his grip is slipping. Laura answers only when necessary, using Brandon's script, each reply crafted to encourage Sterling to dig himself deeper. Sometimes her hands shake so violently, she has to stop typing and press her palms against her knees until she can breathe again. Every time she enters Brandon's office with new messages, he reads them with a calm that steadies her. He categorizes, prints, timestamps, logs everything meticulously. He never praises her, never tells her she's brave, never makes a show of gratitude, but his steady focus, his quiet nods. The way he sets a cup of tea on the table when she comes in pale and trembling, it all says more than praise ever could. One night, she brings him a particularly damning email, Sterling explicitly referencing past arrangements and warning her that cooperation determines which files survive. Brandon reads it once. Then again, his jaw tightens, a small movement she wouldn't have noticed months ago. "This is enough," he says softly. "More than enough." The next morning, he submits everything to the Attorney General. And then everything changes. Within 48 hours, the investigation becomes public. Within 72 hours, Sterling is suspended. 4 other board members follow. Their portraits disappear from the hall outside the donor suite as if someone has ripped out pieces of the school's spine. News trucks swarm the campus, helicopters thrum overhead, students march with signs. Some demand justice, others demand silence. Faculty groups release statements. A few deny everything. A few step forward with stories they had buried for decades. And through it all, Laura walks the campus like a ghost. Some students glare, others whisper. A few scream at her in passing. The old guard, the legacy kids, the children of donors. The ones who never worried about tuition or grades or consequences. They look at her as if she set fire to the school with her own hands. One morning, returning from a meeting with the initiative team, she finds her dorm door vandalized. Thick red spray paint, letters jagged with fury. "Traitor," the word runs across the door like a wound. For a long moment she just stands there, her backpack slipping from her shoulder, her breath caught in her throat. Her chest constricts, her vision blurs, and a sudden cold comes over her, sharp and overwhelming. She presses a trembling hand to her mouth. The hallway is empty, but somehow she feels watched, judged, accused by every shadow. Footsteps echo from around the corner. She flinches instinctively. A security officer rushes forward, eyes widening at the door. "Miss Chun, step back, please." She nods mechanically, taking 2 steps away, though she wants to collapse right where she stands. Within minutes, the dorm supervisor arrives. Then 2 more security officers. Someone radios for maintenance. Someone else starts snapping photos for documentation. Their voices swirl around her, muffled and distant. She feels like she's underwater. Then a voice breaks through the noise. "Laura." She turns. Brandon stands at the end of the hallway, his expression unreadable but tight with something that borders on anger, not at her, she realizes, but at the violation itself, at the cruelty. He gestures gently. "Come with me." She follows him, still dazed. They walk in silence down the stairs, out the side door, across the courtyard. The winter air is sharp, stinging her cheeks. She keeps her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if she might otherwise shatter. Brandon leads her into the administration building, up one flight, through a locked hallway she's never been in before. He stops in front of a small room near his office. There's a couch, a desk, a lamp, a door with a reinforced lock. "You'll stay here for now," he says quietly. She swallows hard. Is it really that bad? Brandon doesn't answer right away. He steps past her, turning on the lamp. The soft light fills the room with warmth, with calm. He sets her backpack on the desk. When he turns back, his expression is gentler than she's ever seen it. "Yes," he says, "it's that bad. But you're safe here." Her throat tightens. "I didn't realize people would hate me this much." He studies her with careful eyes. "People don't hate you. They hate losing power. They hate losing the version of the world where they were protected. You just happen to be the one who broke the illusion." She looks down at her hands. They're trembling again. "I didn't want to hurt anyone." "I know," Brandon says, "but doing the right thing often hurts people who aren't used to being held accountable." His voice softens. "And doing the right thing almost always hurts the person doing it." Her breath catches. Something inside her loosens, breaks. He doesn't offer empty comfort. He doesn't tell her it will be easy. He only tells her the truth, something she's spent most of her life running from. She sinks onto the couch, exhaustion washing over her so powerfully she feels dizzy. Brandon sits across from her in the chair, not crowding her, not coddling her, just being there. "Can I ask you something?" she murmurs. "Of course. Am I making things worse?" Brandon's answer is immediate. "No, you're doing exactly what this place needed, even if the process is messy. Even if it's painful. Change always feels like collapse before it feels like rebuilding." His words settle into her bones, warm and grounding. Outside, distant chants rise from the quad students protesting, voices blending into a chaotic chorus. Laura closes her eyes, listening. Not running, not hiding. Brandon stands. "Get some rest. I'll be in the office next door." She opens her eyes, meeting his gaze. "Thank you," she whispers. He doesn't nod. He doesn't smile. He simply says, "You're not alone in this." And for the first time since the investigation began, she believes him. Brandon had always been the kind of man who carried pressure quietly, the kind who kept storms inside his chest and never let them show in his face. But in the weeks that followed the investigation, even he seemed stretched thin, like someone pulling too hard on a piece of thread that had been worn down by years of tension. He slept in his office more than he slept in his home. Most nights he didn't sleep at all. The staff whispered about him, how the lights in his wing never went off, how he moved through the halls like a man fighting a war only he could see. He worked 20-hour days without complaint, reading financial reports until his eyes went numb, signing emergency authorizations, taking meetings that left his voice cracked and hoarse. He was trying to keep the university alive, and the university, for the first time in decades, felt like something that might shatter. Laura saw him only in passing, silent, focused, exhausted. His shirt sleeves were always rolled up, the veins on his hands visible as he typed. Sometimes she'd pause at his door, watching him without him noticing, feeling something twist in her chest. Admiration, worry, guilt, gratitude, a mixture too complicated to name. One evening, long after midnight, she found him sitting in the dark of his office with only the glow of his laptop illuminating his face. He looked up at her with tired eyes, not unkind, just stretched. "You should be sleeping," she whispered. He almost smiled. I could say the same, but there was no softness behind it. Only fatigue and a kind of weight that seemed to push down on his shoulders. One afternoon, Brandon's phone rang, an old number he still recognized by heart. His father. Brandon hesitated before answering. He wasn't sure which version of his father he would get, the quiet surgeon who spoke carefully, or the man who had the same steel spine Brandon carried now. The voice on the line was gentle, even proud. "Son, I've been reading the reports." Brandon rubbed a hand over his face. "I know how it looks. This had to happen. I'm proud of you," his father said, the words landing softly. But we're bleeding money. Faster than you can patch the holes. Brandon stared at the spreadsheets littering his desk. Numbers that didn't lie. Numbers that made the reality sting. I'll find a way, he murmured. I have to. His father exhaled through the phone a long-waited breath. Be careful, Brandon. When you stand up to men who were built on corruption, they don't sit down quietly. Something in his father's tone made Brandon pause, but he pushed it aside. There wasn't room in his life anymore for fear. The next morning, Brandon announced a new emergency initiative, one that would drain the university reserves even further, but he didn't flinch. Emergency scholarships. Every student caught in the crossfire of the scandal. Every teenager whose parents had bought their way into places they didn't earn, none of them would lose their education over something they never chose. Not one innocent kid pays for this, Brandon told the finance board. Not one. A few administrators stared at him like he was insane. Others looked at him with a quiet, blooming respect. Laura, standing in the back of the room, felt her throat tighten. People talked about justice as if it were clean, a sharp blade carving truth from lies. But watching Brandon, now tired, rigid, resolute, she understood justice was messy, painful, costly, a living thing. And he was letting it take pieces of him. Late one night, while Brandon was finalizing emergency relief numbers, the quiet of his office shattered. A brick exploded through the window beside him. Glass burst inward, scattering like sharp, violent stars. The crash echoed down the hallway. Brandon instinctively ducked, breath catching in his chest. For a moment, everything was soundless except for the settling clatter of broken glass. Then he saw it, a paper wrapped around the brick, tied with rough twine. He picked it up, fingertips brushing the crumbling edges. 2 words, scrawled in jagged black marker. Resign, or worse. He stood there for a long moment, absorbing the message. The night air rushed in through the broken window, cold against his skin. The campus outside was silent, unaware. Fear wasn't what he felt. Not exactly. Instead, something inside him shifted, something quiet and decisive, like a door closing. He had tried to fix things gently. He had tried to honor everyone involved, even the ones who didn't deserve patience. He had believed that transparency, truth, and fairness would be enough. But staring at that brick, he understood that the people he was fighting were willing to destroy anything to protect themselves. His jaw tightened, his hands steadied, and the softness in him, the part that still hoped these men would do the right thing, finally, quietly, died. Laura rushed in seconds later, breathless, eyes wide. Brandon, oh my God, are you hurt? He looked at her, really looked, and something in his expression changed. It was subtle, almost invisible, but she felt it like a temperature shift. I'm fine, he said. His voice was low, certain. But there was no exhaustion now, no hesitation, only resolve. Glass crunched under his shoes as he stepped forward, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. Laura, he said, this doesn't end with me backing down. She nodded slowly, eyes shimmering. She wasn't afraid, not for him, not anymore. She understood. He wasn't just defending a university. He was defending the kind of world she had always hoped existed. A world where power didn't win simply because it was louder. A world where justice didn't require perfection, only courage. As the wind rustled through the jagged edges of the broken window, Brandon turned back toward his desk, shoulders squared, gaze sharp. Whatever was coming next, he would face it. And he wouldn't face it alone. The morning of the assembly felt heavier than any storm the campus had ever weathered. The air carried a muted tension, the kind that settles in the lungs and makes every breath feel deliberate. Students moved toward the auditorium in slow waves, whispering, arguing, speculating. Reporters lingered beyond the gates, held back by security barriers, their cameras pointed like hungry eyes waiting for the next headline. Inside the auditorium, the energy shifted, tense, electric, uncertain. Rows of students filled the seats, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the massive screens flanking the stage. Professors filed in with stiff shoulders, administrators looked pale, and somewhere among them, the lingering remnants of the old guard tried to appear calm, even as their world tilted beneath them. Laura stood backstage, her palms damp, heart unsteady. She had seen Brandon rehearse the opening line a dozen times, but none of those rehearsals had captured the rawness that clung to him now. He wasn't just a university president today. He was a man about to change the DNA of a place that had shaped generations, and failed generations too. Brandon stepped out from the wings and onto the stage. The auditorium went silent. No microphone needed. The quiet was that deep. He looked out at the students, black, white, Latino, Asian, first generation, legacy, wealthy, working class, all compressed into a single moment of history. There was a flicker of emotion on his face, subtle but unmistakable. Weariness, resolve, hope. Then he pressed a button on the remote in his hand. The screens lit up, and the truth began. Emails, signatures, wire transfers, secret agreements, board votes that had never been disclosed. Photographs of lavish retreats funded by misallocated scholarship money, dollar amounts big enough to make the room exhale in a collective gasp. Buildings that bore donor names, buildings paid for with dirty money, coerced favors, and backroom deals made at students' expense. The evidence was unflinching, ruthless in its clarity, irrefutable. Some students covered their mouths, others stared in disbelief. A few cried. The old guard shifted in their seats, faces draining of color. The walls they'd built for decades collapsing in real time. Then came the part no one saw coming. Except Laura. Brandon changed the slide, and a scanned legal document filled the screen, a signature at the bottom unmistakable. His father's. A murmur rippled across the room. Confused, stunned. "This," Brandon said, his voice steady but warm, "is the final transfer of ownership. Effective today, Hayes University is no longer a family-owned institution. My father has signed it into an independent nonprofit trust." People blinked, leaned forward, tried to process. Brandon continued, "No single donor, no single family, including mine, will ever own this university again. No board can be bought. No legacy student can buy their way into a place that should have belonged to someone who worked harder." The crowd erupted, not with jeers, but a stunned applause that grew and grew until it filled the room like thunder brushing up against the walls. A release of long-held frustration. A breath finally exhaled, but Brandon wasn't finished. He waited for the applause to die down, then shifted his stance, shoulders squared yet gentle. "Starting next semester," he said, "we will offer full-need scholarships to every admitted student who cannot afford our tuition." A mix of cries and gasps answered him. A girl in the fourth row covered her face. A boy whispered, "Oh my God," into his hands. "We will also implement mandatory bias and ethics training for all staff, faculty, and students. And beginning immediately, oversight committees will be elected, not appointed by the student body. You will have a voice, not a symbolic seat." Another roar. Not angry, empowered. Then his tone changed, softer but sharper in its honesty. "And if any of you don't like these changes," he said, eyes sweeping across the auditorium, "the door is right there. This university no longer belongs to donors. It belongs to every student who earns their place here." The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was awe, but not everyone accepted the moment. From the back of the auditorium, a voice cut through the hush, sharp, angry, ugly, a racial slur, directed at Brandon. The room froze. Students turned, horrified. Faculty stiffened. Security instinctively moved. Brandon didn't flinch. He stepped down from the stage slowly, deliberately, the soles of his shoes echoing faintly with each measured step. Security hovered, waiting for his signal. He stopped directly in front of the student, a young man whose face was flushed with adrenaline, shame, or both. The kid's bravado cracked now that Brandon stood inches away. Brandon didn't raise his voice. He didn't humiliate him. He simply looked at the boy with tired, steady eyes, the eyes of someone who had carried too much weight for too long, but still chose mercy over retribution. "I forgive you," Brandon said softly. The gentleness in his tone made the insult feel even smaller. "Now leave my university." The words weren't loud, but they echoed like a verdict. Security moved in. The student's posture collapsed. He realized too late that he wasn't facing a man he could intimidate. He let himself be guided out of the aisle, the auditorium dead silent as he was escorted toward the door. The only sound was the soft rustling of jackets and the distant click of the exit opening. Brandon watched until the student disappeared from view. Then he turned back to the audience, not triumphant, not angry, just human. There was vulnerability in the way he stood there, a deep ache in his expression, like he had given a piece of himself to this moment. Then quietly, people began to applaud. Not wild, not explosive, but slow, respectful, transformative. Students rose from their seats, one row, then another. Professors stood too, hands trembling. Laura watched from backstage, tears collecting in her eyes, because she understood the weight of what Brandon had done and the cost he had paid to do it. He had not only changed the university, he had changed what leadership meant inside those walls. And maybe, quietly, without intending to, he had changed her too. 8 months had passed, and Hayes University felt like a different world. Walking across the quad, one could hardly recognize the familiar paths. The campus had transformed, not just in appearance, but in spirit. Students of all backgrounds mingled freely. Laughter rang from the library to the art studios, from dorm courtyards to the newly renovated cafeterias. The banners that once celebrated legacy families now highlighted student achievements, peer mentorship successes, and community initiatives. The air felt alive with possibility, vibrant with voices that were finally heard, finally valued. Laura Chun navigated the throngs of students with a quiet pride. Her blonde hair pulled back into a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a crisp university hoodie, the insignia of her alma mater hanging over her heart. A semester early, she was graduating with honors in sociology. Her thesis titled "Privilege, Performative Cruelty, and the Cost of Redemption." Each word she had typed, each page she had painstakingly researched, reflected months of introspection, unlearning, and reconciliation. She thought back to her first weeks on campus as the girl who ruled social spaces with sharp laughter and subtle cruelty. How far she had come. How painfully slow, yet irrevocably, the change had taken root. Her mentorship program had become a model across the university. Students who once felt invisible now had allies, advocates, and companions in their journey through the academic maze. Laura remembered her own nervousness on day one, and now she was the one offering a hand, a seat, a voice to someone who might otherwise feel they didn't belong. She moved with purpose, pausing to smile at a group of first years laughing over coffee. She caught fragments of their conversation. Words like, "thank you," and "finally someone sees us," and her chest swelled with a mixture of humility and exhilaration. The commencement ceremony began under a sky tinged with gold and pale blue. Students filed into their seats, families clutching programs, cameras poised, anticipation humming in the air. Marcus, once the quiet work-study student she had mocked in the cafeteria, now strode confidently to the podium to deliver the student's speech. His voice was steady, imbued with honesty and vulnerability, each word a bridge from the past to the present. "Some of us," Marcus began, eyes sweeping the crowd, "were taught we didn't belong here. Others were taught they owned the place. Turns out we all just needed someone willing to make room." He paused, letting the words linger. The auditorium seemed to hold its breath, and that someone was willing to fight for us, not for glory, not for recognition, but because they believed in the possibility of a better place for all of us. Brandon Hayes sat on the stage, officially President Hayes, now the youngest in the university's history. He listened with quiet pride, heart tight with emotion, a subtle smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. His eyes scanned the faces of students who had been through so much, who had grown, who had dared to change. The applause that followed Marcus's speech rolled over him like a warm tide, affirming the quiet, painful work of the past months. After the ceremony, Laura made her way to Brandon's office. The corridors felt familiar, comforting now, yet imbued with the weight of everything they had endured together. Brandon greeted her with a nod and gestured toward his desk. Architectural renderings lay spread out before them, crisp lines and vibrant designs that spoke of possibility and vision. The new student center, he said, voice low, almost reverent, will be called the Laura Shun Belonging Center. Laura's eyes widened, tears pricking at the corners. "I don't deserve that," she whispered, her voice trembling. Brandon shook his head gently. "It's not for who you were. It's for who you decided to become, and for every student who will walk through those doors thinking they don't belong. They'll see your name and know the story." She reached for him, and they hugged a long, deliberate embrace. Not romance, not passion, but a deep, unspoken respect and understanding. Two people who had been through fire together, who had learned and grown, who had shaped a new reality from chaos and cruelty. Later that day, Laura walked across the campus, hoodie snug, jeans scuffed, hair loose in the breeze. She spotted a nervous freshman, a young black student sitting alone on a bench, hands fidgeting with the straps of his backpack. His gaze flitted around, uncertain, invisible to the laughter and chatter surrounding him. Laura approached slowly, a gentle smile spreading across her face. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked softly, lowering herself beside him. He looked up, startled, uncertainty etched across his features. "I know exactly how it feels to think this place isn't for you." The freshman blinked, relief washing over his expression as he exhaled softly. Together, they sat in the sunlit quad, a quiet moment of inclusion, understanding, and the passing of the torch. Laura felt a warmth in her chest, a satisfaction that was quiet but enduring. This was what belonging looked like. This was the work they had all fought for, the transformation that could not be undone. From his office window, Brandon watched, phone pressed to his ear. His father's voice spoke softly, approving, gentle. "You did good, son." Brandon smiled, eyes lingering over the rebuilt campus, the laughter, the conversations, the small acts of courage that now stitched the university together. He felt the weight of every challenge, every sleepless night, every difficult choice, and he felt lighter for it. Voiceover. Brandon. "I spent my whole life being told places like this weren't meant for people like me. So I built one that is." The camera pulls back, capturing the quad alive with students of every color, creed, and story, all moving forward together. Laura's presence among them is quiet but powerful, a symbol of change and possibility. And as the scene fades, a soft invitation lingers in the air, someone willing to witness courage, growth, and transformation in action. "Subscribe to the channel," the voice whispers gently, "and follow the stories of those who choose to make room for others, because belonging is something we build together,